Thanks, Michael. Hi, Angie.
Hi.
And it's such a pleasure. Thank you, Michael and Jenny, for having us here and for staging the event in the actual exhibition space. There's nothing really better than being among the work. And we'll, of course, be talking about more than just these particular paintings, but it's just a real treat. So thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to start with by talking about where you've come to at this point. I mean, Michael mentioned a couple of things, but like this handful of group shows in sort of regionally. You're going to have your work in show in Washington D.C. You've had coming up. You've had solo shows at the Macintosh Museum, London, and of course here at the Michael Gibson Gallery. You've had two exhibitions. And your work your reach has really expanded beyond London too. Your work was really featured quite prominently at the Toronto Art Fair this year and at LA in Montreal. And you were, I mean, what else? There's a great review by Joel Fafleck in Border Crossings magazine, which is great. And you were also shortlisted for the Tracy Emin Prize, which is a weird thing for me to end on, but this is a big deal. For people who don't know, Tracy Emin is a major British artist she's still alive, really made her name in the 1980s. And can we just begin by talk to a little bit about where Emin, and this is sort of a little bit, shouldn't be about her, but like how you see how she's influenced you and just how the discussion went.
Yeah, so like a big part of how I work is like research and things that I get interested in. And Tracy Emin was an artist that I'm very obsessed with and was very obsessed with for quite a while. It's funny because when I was like 15 and I first saw her work, I was like, ew, what is this? And I didn't get it. And like, that's the important thing about living is you learn to enjoy things at different stages in your life. So Tracy Emin, more and more I was engaged with her work. I listened to podcasts. I even like traveled to England to see her exhibition. And then I went to Margate before it was cool to see where she came from, because it was so much part of her becoming an artist. And like, I'm a real nerd about that kind of stuff. So I went and looked at it. And then like in podcasts, she'd talk about this residency that she was going to start in this school in Margate. And I was like, I'm going to go there. That's what I want. And so I applied for it. I got shortlisted and I actually got to do a video interview with her. And it was really cool. I didn't get it, but I was willing to like change my whole life and go to Margate. In the end, I'm glad that I didn't go because I don't think it would have actually suited me, but who knows, like it did break my heart.
Starting on a heartbreak. So what, over this period, having your heart broken and all this great success, can you talk us through how your practices maybe evolved or changed over the past, whatever it is, 5 years or so?
Well, I would even go all the way back. Like when I started painting when I was 16, that's what I enjoyed doing. So I just kept doing it. And then I kept doing it. And then we moved to London. I got a studio when I was 21 and I was like working a part-time job, going to the studio and eventually working my way to just having a full studio practice. But nobody really gave a fuck about me. And I think it's the best thing I could have had because it made me very serious about my studio practice. And I just would show up almost every day, 8 to 10 hours a day, painting. And then slowly, I would kind of say it was James Patton, like the old curator at the Macintosh, who gave me my first break when I was part of a group show at the Macintosh. Right. And he took 2 of my pieces. I can't remember the name of the show. It was like portraits and something. And it was a lot of important artists and pieces from the collection. There was a Joyce Whelan with the "Oh Canada" stamped lips in the show. And like, that's so cool to get shown with. And I do remember they had to build a partition because the one big painting was considered like too obscene for the campus, so they still showed it, but it was like
behind a curtain.
Yeah, like you couldn't necessarily see it right away. So that I would say like was the beginning, was having somebody like that take an interest in me.
Did they acquire your work then, or did they acquire it the second show?
Actually, it wasn't until I had a show at the Gibson,
Okay.
that they acquired a piece. But I would say like it's something like somebody taking a keen interest in really loving the arts and wanting to take a chance on you. And I would say the same with you coming and not knowing really anything of the city. You came to my studio, and at that point I had my studio in my house. It was a super bizarre, and I think I was like showing you a huge stack of like really intimate watercolors, being like, this is my life. And you didn't know me at all. And yet then you gave me a show. So be weird.
But talk about your work, how the work maybe you were making at that point at the group show and leads into the work you see here. Like put that in your terms.
I would actually say that this work relates so much to that. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, because I've always been very interested in the body and how we look at the body and how the body interacts with each other. I think especially with this show, I'm really interested in the idea of how we perceive the body, or in our society, what place it has. So it's like the body for labor, the body for politics, the body for sex. And we kind of like separate all of these different things. And I think with this show, I start to mesh it together into these almost violent and yet sensual orgies. Like it depends how you look at it. And I think that tone was always in my work. But I think with this one, I just decided to go full body.
Full body. I'll kind of question to come to that, but that interchange between the sensual and the violent is very interesting. It was something that we had a lot of chats about. So yeah, as Michael mentioned, born in Calgary, moved to London kind of late teens, early 20s, right?
18.
18. And you didn't go to art school, but I mean, when we first met at that studio, recognized immediately that, you know, I don't know if you describe yourself as an autodidact, but you're a person who takes learning very serious in a kind of lived way. And I want to know, it's kind of a weird question, but how did not going to art school, how has that shaped you as an artist, do you think?
Well, I will say that like I went to university for 1 year for philosophy, and the reason I dropped out was because I would memorize everything, and then I'd do the tests and I'd forget everything. And so like what you said was important, is that I needed lived information. I needed that the things that I read and did were things that I could enact and live in my life. And so it had meaning outside of just like getting a score on a test. So not having gone to art school, I don't really know so much until like maybe last year when I was invited to do MFA studio visits, and I got to see what that side of it was, and it didn't suit me, and I don't think it was suiting the students very much either.
Well, is that one thing? Is how do crits happen for you? I mean, crits are part of art school. It's like one of the big things. So is that something that you've found a way of developing with friends, colleagues naturally, or is it something that you're just like, I just don't do?
Well, like, so having not gone to art school, it means that I didn't have a close network of friends, or I didn't necessarily have friends who are all the same age as me. And so I had to find people that I could connect with. And I think in that way, from a very young age, I was able to make friends in various, like much older than me, maybe same age, some younger. And so all of my friend groups are of various ages, come from various backgrounds. And so not having that homogenous kind of thinking has been really helpful for me to see things in a different way. And then I do have very like close friends that I let see the work, or I talk to about the work. I like texting about it, sending pictures, and I would say to that point. But other than that, maybe I'm just like really egotistical and I just keep pushing forward and it doesn't really matter to me.
Friends, of course, you must have friend networks kind of at least all over the place.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about London and what arriving here, when you did, how the community shaped how you developed your artistic practice?
Well, having grown up in Calgary, which I didn't realize was like a bigger city. And then when I moved here, there were no tall buildings and I was kind of horrified. But I've kind of grown to love it here and find my place within the city. And it's a city that can force you to feel very isolated and separate, like having the campus somewhere else. The downtown can feel like a bomb has gone off in it. And then there's like the suburbs and things. But I try to like make my life cohesive by like interacting with all different aspects of it. So I think like, because I used to, not as much anymore, but I used to go to the university library like once a week and go to Weldon and go through the stacks. Unfortunately, they're like putting a lot of the stacks away. And that's sad because that's an important kind of learning to me is surprise. So yeah, I would say I don't know like what it would be like to be in any other city, but this city in itself, being close to Toronto, being close to Detroit and Windsor, I can go to Toronto all the time and see the big city, but it never had any appeal to me to like spend all my money on rent or have a job doing something like that. So
are you an easily distracted person? Is there an aspect of London that especially when you arrived early, where you didn't necessarily know people, where you could find studio time and weren't, this is going to sound terrible, but distracted by other people?
I'm not a huge people person, and I'm really obsessive. So it's like I find the few people that I have like a kindred spirit with, and then I feel like that's solid. And like all I ever want to do is be in the studio or be alone working. That's why I'm grateful we live in times where there's cell phones so I can text people, but I don't have to see them in person.
I'm glad you brought up studio because that's where I kind of want to go next. That was one of the things both at Stanley Street, your house/studio, but also down on Dundas. It's a really interesting relationship. You work small. You work big. You work with oil. You work with ink. You work with through performance. These are sort of the atomic facts of your practice. But I'd really like it if you could give us a kind of portrait of your studio practice. As a kind of verb. How you operate there from one day to the next, or from one season to the next, or from one year to the next, and how the studio itself has a kind of genius or something like that. Yeah, I'm
kind of like, as much as I say I always want to be at the studio, it is like this on-off relationship, and the fact that like I work in series, and so I tend to like pump out a bunch of work, and then I like to kind of pull away and fill up on ideas and what I call research, which is just like living my life. And then going to the studio and giving it my all. And so like when I'm in studio mode, it's like I tend to do like what other people do, 5 days on, 2 days off. And I wake up in the morning, get to the studio, and then when I'm at the studio, I like do certain things to kind of turn myself on to like the creative brain. Sometimes it's really easy. I get to the studio and I'm ready to pick up the brush and paint right away. And then other times it's, what I think people don't realize, a lot of studio time is sitting there and doing nothing, or seemingly doing nothing. And like giving into the fact that that's the work, I think makes better work, because pushing yourself to think that you have to like be in action all the time diminishes the actual act of painting. And so, I spend a lot of time just sitting there thinking and daydreaming. But then
you got a sweet couch.
I do have
you got that couch.
Yeah,
right?
That's like, that was my first studio. So this studio I have now is like my most ideal studio. It's really big. And then I got my first studio couch. Somebody was moving out and got rid of it. It's like this burgundy faux velvety, and it's great for napping on, great for reading, great for other things. And then I got like a stack of books, and I'm always like reading and feeding my brain. And then like the actual act of painting is loud music and me dancing and painting and just like actually doing it.
What music were you listening to when you were painting this series, or this, I don't know, this exhibition?
I made a playlist that I was listening. I tend to make playlists for, and like the playlist had the title for the show for it.
Oh, right, yeah.
I guess like I listened to bedroom pop. Like I grew up on punk, and then I've slowly become, I just like pop music with sweet lyrics and good beats.
Lovely. There's chamber music, and then there's bedroom pop. I like doing this because I find it funny. Maybe nobody else does. But if I had to assign 3 emojis to your work, it would be the book,
the
smiley face, and the sexy lips. Of course, I wouldn't be so reductive, but there is, in this work here, in previous work you've shown, there is a recurring set of subjects and objects that kind of appear. Can you kind of take us through a kind of key or a legend that talks about these objects, what attracted you to them, why they keep recurring, how your interest has shifted, a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really into, and I'm pushing more and more into the world building, and like the world building being uniquely coming from my own head. And so having these characters and these objects within the paintings that cross over is really like part of those worlds that I'm creating. And I would say that like having, like, some of them is personal details, and I like things that like cross over to like what I like and things that are from my life, and then let the universal, and then somebody else being able to identify objects. So I like that kind of ambiguity within the work. But yeah, like this, books are common within it. Food. Lately, I've been painting my cat into a lot of the paintings, and then in this work, especially, I've been putting the smiley faces into it, and that was in my watercolors for a long time, and that was like the shorthand of just an emoting a person. And now I've been putting it into the paintings because there's this interesting thing with portraiture. So as soon as you put a face and it looks like somebody, then the painting becomes about somebody. And that's not necessarily of interest to me. But once you put the smiley face in the painting, it becomes, again, universal.
Yeah. But there's also that, what the smiley face did for me was, someone who maybe just glances at your work, there is this kind of like, oh, she's an expressionist, and there's all that kind of baggage about what an expressionist is doing. And so when I see a smiley face suddenly appear in the midst of all these kind of roiling colors, I go, no, there's something else going on here. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship as an artist to expressionism, painterly expressionism, that kind of tradition going back to
Also, I would say that the smiley faces, there's something kind of insidious and a bit like funny about it. Like, I think there's a moment when you come up and it's like smiling back at you that you can kind of be like, oh, this is funny. And I like that moment in the painting because painting in itself can take itself very seriously. It has a long history, and I take it very seriously. But I think moments that allow humor, not just in painting and in art, but in life, are very important. So the smiley face. As for expressionism and like that painterly style, that comes naturally to me. As how I've wanted to paint. I like the idea of it expressing movement and feeling together in one, because when I'm painting, I feel like I'm in dialogue with the canvas. And so emoting through the paint, which is expressionism, is essentially what I'm doing when I'm in the studio.
The other thing that looms large in your work, I think it's difficult to escape, are the titles. And that's a part of a whole expressionist tradition too. Thinking of grand titles like what Barnett Newman did or what George Motherwell did. Can you talk a bit about how titles in particular, but text in general, feeds into how you understand what you're painting and what you're presenting on canvas?
Yeah. So my notebooks that I carry with me all the time, they don't very little drawing in it. I don't actually enjoy drawing that much. I like writing ideas. So when I have the idea for a painting, I write down what it's going to look like. I write down the palette, and then I maybe write some of the feelings of things that are going to happen in the next series and stuff like that. And then I also keep a running list of titles. And a lot of the time the titles come from ideas I have and then texts and conversations with friends. And that probably is the most autobiographical part of the work, are the titles. And then so text, I love reading. Actually reading art essays and catalogs is one of my favorite things to read. I love...
There's hope.
It's all with me. Because it lets you imagine, when somebody writes about a painting and you don't see the painting, you imagine the painting. And so then I am making a painting through words that somebody else has described. And I find that it turns me on to painting so much. Somebody writing about painting, I'm like, oh, I got to go pick up the brush. It's so attractive. And then, so my life is just full of words because I just always have a stack of books with me. I think I was talking to you. I love anime, and all the anime I I watch is subtitled, so it's always visuals with text. And so I think text is just very important to me, also in a conceptual way, because as soon as you have a title and it's saying something and it doesn't necessarily relate to the painting, in a way the painting becomes something different by those two things coinciding.
Yeah. I remember being kind of floored because I had, about a year or so we'd known each other, I came by the studio and I was really proud because I had just, for myself, that I just finished reading A Glastonbury Romance, which is this gigantic book by this misfit English author named John Cupper Powys. And, it's of a kind like Ulysses and like Infinite Jest, except a bit more tweedy and like sexually repressed, maybe, I'm not sure. But I was like, I read this thing and it's kind of obscure and I was like going on and on about it. And and I was describing how Powys describes the primeval sun and how it's so wordy. And you're like, yeah, I know, I like Powys. He's really interesting. I was like, oh, this is great. This person knows what I'm talking about. I'm not just name dropping. Because at that point, I was just like, right now, just name dropping. Can you talk a little bit about your maybe specifically literary influences, just because words and reading is so important to you? You can take that wherever you go. I mean, it could be a cereal box, but also I think we'd be interested to know kind of other literary influences on you. Yeah.
I will say though, like the beginning of Glastonbury Romance is one of the best beginnings of a book. It kind of starts from like a God perspective and slowly gets to the minute. And I really like that. And I think even as a painter, that imagery is amazing. Well, it's weird. Like, so I'm named after a writer, Angela Carter, and she's actually, once I was like 18 and old enough to read her books, she's one of my favorite writers. She writes magic realism, very dystopian, amazing feminist work from the 70s. Unfortunately, she died like in her 50s, but like she is amazing. So she's one of the huge influence. I love magic realism. I like books that kind of bend reality, but in a way what magic realism is doing is putting feeling into concrete form in words. I really love Canadian writer Anne Carson is amazing. She's a classicist. I kind of put her as like in the writing version of Cy Twombly. Like they both are amazing at shorthand. They take like all of antiquity and like create like a plateau. And that's of interest to me within my own work because I think of painting as sitting on a giant heap of art history. And so like, yeah, so someone like Anne Carson is amazing. Sheila Heti is great. Miranda July. I like a lot of Japanese writers like Banana Yoshimoto, things like that. But like always like looking for stuff to read.
Absolutely. Surprising thing, you've told me to the effect that you don't want conversations about your work to dwell on sex. Now, as a lapsed Presbyterian, that's great. We don't have to, but no. I think many people would be curious about that, to learn about that. Can you talk about what it is about the kind of clear display of sexuality in your work that you don't want to talk about, or that misses the point?
It's more like I find it very pigeonholing, and I think it narrows the work. And honestly, I don't think so much. When I'm in the studio, I'm not like, woohoo, this is erotic, and I'm doing some crazy stuff. I'm just like making the work that I really want to make. I'm comfortable with the body. I'm comfortable with sexuality. And I think that I understand that it's an important conversation, but I think I'm having it on the canvas. So the talking of it isn't as interesting to me.
Quick's sheer carnality of paint transports us beyond good and evil to explore how morality fails us at the threshold of desire itself. This is what one of the things Joel Fathlack wrote about the Museum London show that happened basically a year ago today. So another way of expressing it, you've talked about the painting as a kind of amoral act. I'm not sure if I'm quite capturing that, but this idea of kind of going beyond good and evil in that kind of moral sense. You've also mentioned that you don't think painting is apolitical. No. Can you talk a little bit about? I'm not to say that that there's a contradiction there, but you talk a little bit about the place of kind of morality in painting or not, and then the political in oil paint.
Yeah. So when I was talking about the amoral aspect of painting, what I'm talking about is the purely philosophical nature of me being in the studio. So there's me living my everyday life, and then when I get to the studio, it's one of the most freeing spaces because I get to exist outside of the pressures of the world and like the things, like obviously those are things that I carry with me and I think about, but there's nobody else looking. It's just me in conversation with a blank canvas. And so when I talk about trying to push towards an amoral view within the work, is that I'm trying to surprise myself because like I exist within a status quo. And so to break those norms that I'm maybe not even aware that I'm participating in would require that I become amoral. And what I'm really saying is to try to like build better outside of what I'm given. And so, yeah, no, I actually think that the role of art and the role of the artist is both a very moral and very political role and very important about what the work does. And that's the conversation part about when the paintings come to the viewer and that dialogue occurs. So that's...
Great. Sorry, I'm going to move on to this page here. Can you talk a little bit about is there, I mentioned influences, you can sort of talk about some artistic influences, we talked about Tracy Emin. Are there, do you think there's a value in spending time with things you don't like, or things, and whether they be specifically works of art or pieces of music that you don't necessarily gel, but is there a benefit there? I guess this is a kind of a leading question, but I wouldn't mind you sort of talking on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually super important. I think you become like really boring if you just like stick to the things that you like. Like people who like the same music they liked in high school and things like that, that's cool. But like there's a lot of music out there. So it's like to always push yourself into uncomfortable situations or wondering like, why do I not like this thing? Like I always think that questioning why something is ugly to oneself is super important. It's both important in the studio and then it's important when you're engaging with other work, media, ideas. So yeah, it's hard to like look for it because everything that we do is kind of within an algorithm. Like even when I'm on Instagram, it's going to select what it thinks I like. So then, and then all the people I surround myself tend to have the same politics and ideas as myself. And so it's can be shocking to see what's on the other side, but the other side's important to see.
Can you talk a little bit about your life online or how you interact with the internet as it relates to making work or creating kind of tangible paintings?
Yeah, so I had like I had an Instagram way back and then it got deleted. And I think that Instagram I had was a lot more of like a mix of my art and my personal life. And then my current Instagram is basically just art. I don't really put too much personal stuff in there. But it's like I like, if you know what you're using and why you're using certain platforms, I like it for the fact that I can make new friends. I can look at art I didn't know existed. I can see things outside of London, outside of Canada, and engage with different politics and ideas through that. So, and like way back in the day, I used to have this Tumblr, and it was called like Angie every day, and I used to take a picture of myself in the studio, and I made really good friends from that. And so I hate the internet. Like I think it's an awesome space to waste your time, but it's also an awesome space to find really cool stuff.
Yeah, I've heard that double-sidedness of do you think it the way it's kind of the social media world has amped up? It seems since 2016 has had an impact on the kind of things you're painting, or do you see what you're doing in the studio, at least in the kind of traditional terms of painting, as kind of completely divested of, or not separate from, of course, nothing is separate, but a different kind of activity or realm from the online stuff?
No, like I'm always like saving images of things that I see, or I see color palettes, or like even like last year I put out a call for models and asked people to send me pictures from poses that I sent them. And that was like a really intimate, almost performative gesture of having people send me modeled pictures. So I like interacting with the community on that forum. And I would say it influences the work. There's something so weirdly painterly about touching a screen. Like the slick oiliness of like touching and very quickly moving on it and seeing a lot of visuals is very stimulating. And that kind of feels like oil painting.
I've never heard that, but that's interesting.
It gets greasy.
Yeah, so I know. I had a question that I've lost. It's last this other one. Tell me about when Angie Quick is not painting. What are you doing? Tell me a bit about hobbies.
Yeah,
and how that informs or doesn't inform the art.
I'm a big nerd, so I really like reading. I love anime. I like being active. Like the thing is being a painter and making big paintings and showing up all the time is very physical. So I like to be really embodied and in my body. So I like going to the gym. I like working out, and I like keeping my body tuned up for the job. I also think like it helps process ideas, and like the work is bodily, so that's part of it. This isn't a hobby, but recently I got a bigger bed and it's really changed my life. No, but it has, because
first it was the couch, now it's the bed. You're getting,
I haven't always been somebody who's able to relax. And I always would beat myself up for being like lazy, or I always had to be working, always producing. And through the years, I allow myself to have downtime. And so in this last month, I took off in January because I had a very intense year of painting. And I spent a lot of time in bed. It was really the new paintings I'm making are of beds. So it's like these things that I engage with that influence the work.
Have you entered your nap phase yet? Like as soon as I became 42, I started napping and loving it. Get there yet?
Yeah, I'm into my, not so much recently, but like in the last year when I was like doing like intense painting, I was napping on that studio couch all the time. Because like if I feel it and it's like, I need to sleep, I have to go and have a nap.
Thank God for pets. I did remember when you had the show at the Macintosh, you did a series of, it was over Zoom, of course, but I think it was over Zoom, but it was a series of basically, can you talk about that performance that you did where you were drawing?
My psychic watercolors?
Thank you very much. And you're also doing a workshop at Museum London, plug, that is also themed around sort of the use of watercolors in kind of a non-traditional way. Can you talk about that aspect of your?
Yeah, I'm trying to make the public psychic, and it's really, they're trying. I don't know if everyone knows that that's what I'm trying to do for the workshop, but anyways, so this idea of psychic water, like, where do I want to start with this? I'm actually going to go back a little bit. Is like I like doing a bit of performance work within what I do because I'm alone in a studio all the time, and so I don't get to interact with people that much. So I like to come up with performances that allow moments where I can like really engage with people in an intimate way. And so the psychic watercolors came about. I think it was with the Macintosh show initially I came up with this idea, is that someone would sit across from me, I would look at them, and I'd get an image, and then I would immediately start painting what I felt / saw with them. And then in that moment, then they'd get a watercolor. And I really like that also because there's something a bit bougie about being a painter and this idea of it, the richness of it and what a big painting costs. And I think everyone should get to live with art, and the idea that someone gets a free takeaway, both experience and piece, is important to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important, and like that very initial idea of like looking at someone, having a feeling, and making a piece immediately, that's more and more what I'm pushing towards, is like what's happening in my mind space and putting that onto the canvas more.
And in terms of teaching it, leading a class, and maybe you're going to be teaching a class or doing a studio thing at York, right? Coming up. What by not just sort of having audiences or community members kind of there in front of you and you're kind of creating paintings in response to them, but actually having them do work. I guess I'm interested in this idea of you as kind of not an art educator in any kind of traditional sense, but this kind of a teacher or something. What is this kind of something you've always sort of wanted to do, or is
no.
it? Talk a little bit about that.
No, well, it's just like I like any opportunity to like talk about art and engage with it. And the idea of engaging with people who maybe have like a naked experience of art making is exciting to me, because then it's a new dialogue that's happening and getting to see other people creating, and almost in a way, I have my own philosophy of what it means to make art and what I do in the studio. And then furthering that conversation with other people, I think it allows a breakdown of what it means to make art, and maybe like take away some of the pretension of what that is, and that maybe everyone can access a certain kind of creativity.
Expressionism has this kind of, for some people, has this kind of curious quality where you're not, it's the perennial question, and I apologize, but it's that question about when do you know this thing is done? How does that work for you as sort of an expressionist, working with these large canvases? You're working in your notebook, you're refining a certain palette. It's kind of this really interesting relationship between text and canvas. But can you talk a little bit about the process and the idea of conclusions and completions?
Yeah, like I don't really ever know what a painting is going to look like when it's done. So as much as I have the notes of how I'm going to start and what a palette might look like, the painting really develops. We're working together in the studio, and I do look at it as a conversation. And so at a certain point, the conversation ends and the painting is kind of ready to go live its life. And so the most important part is that I think that the painting can live without me and outside of the studio and further down into a time that I can't necessarily anticipate. And so it feels like when it's done, it's living.
So you and the painting, is this a good way of describing it, as are kind of this closed room? I mean, you have these kind of texts that you write and refer to maybe in some way, but you're not necessarily looking at photographs, or you're looking at the live model or anything like that?
It depends. Like in different times within the work that I've made, I will have references, and sometimes I love referencing old paintings. I find that really entertaining because I think that exists in our collective consciousness in a kind of canon sense. And so to recall that in a painting is, like a trope. But with this work, yeah, there's certain little kinds of references sometimes, but essentially with the bodies, I was really trying to what I was talking about earlier is the shorthand, is like the one stroke to get across the movement of the body. And sometimes I don't even know what that's going to look like. And then I let the stroke decide. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is what's happening here in the painting. So it goes two ways. Sometimes there's reference, sometimes there's not. I'm kind of pushing more and more to no reference, just for personal interest.
And clearly there's not a lot of, at least conscious premeditation here. This is you having a dialogue. And are there moments in your painting where I'm trying to ask this in a way that's not leading, but I want you to talk about ways where you've kind of fucked up a part of your canvas or screwed up here, but that it ends up becoming a thing. Talk about that, screwing up at a painting. Like, how do you resolve that? Or
I always say that starting a painting is the very beginning of problematizing. As soon as you put a bunch of strokes on a canvas, you've created a problem because it's not a finished painting. And so then it's like, well, what's the next step? What's the next thing? And usually the thing that you like the best is the thing that disappears in the end as you build the layers. Because if you try to hold on to something from the beginning and you're just really precious about it, it's going to look like a bad painting. It's going to look like that one area that you were trying to hold on to the whole time. And so the killing of the painting, or like the letting go of preciousness, is really important. And so yeah, there's times where I will literally cry in the studio because I feel like I'm failing the painting, I'm failing the idea, and it's ugly. But sometimes it's ugly, and then I sit with it and I think, why is it ugly? And then I'm like, oh, actually that's a good painting.
And sitting with things that you don't necessarily like
is important.
That is a really important thing. Yeah, that's good. What I'm going to kind of move toward wrapping up, because I'm sure there'll be questions. But are there, where you've got this body of work here? Where are things headed? Not to make you too having to perform your psychic duties, but like, where are things headed for you? So in terms of the work, in terms of the ways of working, and yeah.
Yeah, like I just got back to the studio a week and a bit ago, and so I thought I was going to start working smaller, but I put up a 6 by 10 foot canvas, and and then I've got these other canvases going. One has like animal heads in it, and I don't know, like it's just interesting. Like it's going a lot more world building, a lot more expressive. I'm going to be collaborating with another artist for some of the stuff that I'm doing. So yeah, I don't know, like just giving
Where are you in terms of the season of the studio? Are you?
I'm just starting.
You just started. Okay,
it's my favorite time. My favorite thing is starting a canvas.
Right.
And then it's just pain after that. I mean that in like the most like beautiful way, because like when you start a canvas, like a white I never understood this idea of being afraid of a white page or a white canvas, because there's nothing more exciting to me than a big blank canvas, because to me there's so much potential, and like I can basically be frothing at the mouth with the potential of what could happen in that, like the expanse of it. And then as soon as like the first few brush strokes, which feel amazing, and I love like that first very free act of painting is just, it's awesome. And then it's like, and then what? And then this, and then these things. And it's exciting, but then it slows down, because then you're sitting in the studio staring at this thing for a very long time. And it's a different kind of foreplay.
And so we'll continue. Please join me in thanking Angie for this, and thank you for sharing.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to play Phil Donahue, and if anybody has a question, I will rush over to you and stick this microphone in your face so you can ask Angie a question. And this way, the recording that we have here can people on that side of the screen can hear us. Are there any questions?
I answered everything.
Hi, Angie, longtime fan here. I just want to, you're such an inspiration. Do you have any advice for people who are just starting to, get into the artness?
Like the studio part of it, or the art world part of it?
Just the art world part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say, first, I would say the studio part is like showing up is super important, and like having a solid studio practice. I do think having a solid studio practice and making work gets attention eventually. It might take a long time, but like showing that you put the time into the work is super important. I do think that I think being an artist just means that you're just so intently committed to making the same, like whatever work you want to make over and over and over again. And then people start to be like, whoa, that's weird how that person won't stop making that thing. Okay, and then aside from that, it's important to be engaged in your community and going to openings, talking to people, making friends, things like that. I don't go to anything anymore, so that's not... I used to, and it's...
Anyone else?
Hey, Angie.
Hi.
Just a question. I think about your various shows, and each show has so much for us to think about. But the immediate thing that hits me every time I see one of your shows is color. And I feel like I'm introduced to a new color in every, like the show that was here, the Gibson, it was like this dark green that I had never seen before. And, you know, there's some grays, of course, pink. And this one is like, for me, it's yellow. It's like you're introducing me to yellow for the very, very first time.
I love
and
that.
the first thing I do is I have to say, how do I contend with this yellow? How do I contend with this new color? And it's just, I find that really fascinating about your work. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about like color and your relationship to it.
Yeah. It's one of those weird things where I feel very intuitive with color. And so I tend to work with a limited palette, and I really enjoy the act of mixing color. And I don't actually know where it comes from when I start. It's just that I start painting and it almost feels like the painting's call for a certain thing. And so I don't know if it's to mood or something like that. Unfortunately, I don't have a very like intellectual answer to that outside of that it's purely intuition. Like right now, I'm really into fluorescent pink in the studio. And yeah, sometimes some of the colors I find gross. And then I like using it in a way, like you were saying, there's almost something avoidant at times to like, if you come up to it, it can be almost like it's pushing you away, but pulling you in at the same time. And I think those interactions are interesting to me. Because this yellow, it was kind of surprising to me that I even used it. And I would typically hate that, but I love it.
Further questions? Oh.
What do I do? Just hold it?
Yeah, just speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Angie.
Hi.
I've forgotten your name. I'm so sorry. Andrew was mentioning that there's a thread of violence in your work, but I don't see it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the thing, is like I make the paintings and it's kind of like a choose your own adventure for the viewer. And so if you come to the painting and you see something beautiful, sensual, and gorgeous, and I think that that's something that you then bring to the canvas and I'm offering it to you. But at the same time, I think when you have an amassment of bodies and the potential of like limbs moving in strange ways, there is, and sometimes when I say violence, I don't necessarily mean a violent act. It can also be like a force of almost nature, of something being violent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angie. Anybody else want to ask a question? Good. Well, then on that note, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for sharing with us, and congratulations on this show.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.